I made it on Monday. Hope everyone is doing well. This past week we finished our Psalms in the summer series. If you are newer to South Suburban, one of the things that I do over the summers is preach through 10 Psalms. So last year we started this with Psalms 1 through 10. This year we did Psalms 11 through 20. Next year we'll do 21 through 30, etc. Until, Lord willing, we'll get through all the Psalms. At that point, I don't know what I'll do. I might pick another wisdom literature, go through Proverbs together over the summers, go through, who knows? There's a whole host of ways we could do this, but I thought going through the Psalms over the summer would be fun. So we ended in Psalm 20, which is a prayer of deliverance for the king. I talked about the royal psalms that we have. And there's actually other instances in the Bible where we see an example of this taking place. So one that all the commentaries I was reading pointed out specifically is in 2 Chronicles 20, verses 20 and 21. So this is referring to Jehoshaphat, who was a king in Judah, was overall a good king, at least until the end of his life. But in 2 Chronicles 20, starting in verse 20, it says, "They rose early in the morning, and when they went out into the wilderness of Tekoa. And when they went out, Jehoshaphat stood and said, 'Hear me, Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem. Believe in the Lord your God, and you will be established. Believe his prophets, and you will succeed.' And when he had taken counsel with the people, he appointed those who were to sing to the Lord and praise him in holy attire as they went before the army, and say, 'Give thanks to the Lord, for his steadfast love endures forever.' And when they began to sing and praise, the Lord set an ambush against the men of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, who had come against Judah, so that they were routed." So that's just an example that we have where the king asks for the people to pray and plan on his behalf. And the people responded, and then the Lord responds to the prayer for deliverance on the king's behalf. Another thing from the text this time, in verse 4, it talks about, "May he grant you your heart's desire and fulfill all of your plans." That just immediately made me think of Proverbs 16:9, which says, "The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." And that's just a reminder for us that ultimately God is the one who determines where things go. So we can plan and desire things all we want, but we need to leave them up into the hands of the Lord's. And so we in the Gospels, Jesus says, instead of making plans, what you should say is, "If the Lord wills or allows." And so that's part of what we pray as well, in something like the Lord's Prayer, "Your kingdom come and your will be done." Now, one of the things I talked about yesterday specifically was politics, because verse 7 specifically is related to geopolitical realities in the ancient Near Eastern context, and that has continued to be an issue all the way down until today. What does it look like for us as Christians to engage politically in a sinful and fallen world that we have? Now, it is just as important anytime we have some of these difficult or nuanced conversations to note what I don't say as much as what I do say in some of these sermons. What I did not say yesterday is politics don't matter at all. I did not say that. They do, and each political decision that is made has consequences. However, the partisan divides that so easily separate us as people today need to be kept in their proper place. And so what I was trying to emphasize is the fact and the reality that Jesus is still on the throne, and we don't have a vote in it. All we can do is decide whether or not we want to acknowledge that reality and then bow our knee and submit to the fact that Jesus is and will forever be on his throne. Now, part of the difficulty with this, I think I have it only electronically. There's a book that I read in 2016, I believe, that was titled, it might have been 2020, "Why Do the Nations Rage?" That is using theology and biblical ethics to approach some of the political conversations that we have. And some of the terminology that is used in that book I found helpful, referring to either jagged line versus straight line issues. So there are some biblical commands that are a straight line to some political ideas that we should have. So one of the things that we are commanded in the Bible is do not murder, which means as Christians we must be opposed to abortion. We do not have the choice whether or not we will be pro-life. That is explicit. Because abortion is murder, we must as Christians be pro-life. However, with that said, there is a lot of room for the best ways to move forward in that conversation, which is where this becomes a jagged line issue. So a jagged line is like we have this specific truth, and it's like it takes some theological and philosophical work to get to the application of that specific command. I mean, another, I'll talk through abortion a little bit more specifically in a minute, but another one that we are commanded to do is to care for the widow, the orphan, the sojourner, and the stranger that is among us. That's, not, again, not an option for Christians. We are commanded to care for those that many in our world would view as disenfranchised or marginalized. However, what is the best way to pursue that? Is it through open borders? Is it through a specific and very rigorous citizen application process? What does that look like? That's where it becomes much more careful, and we need to be willing to have some of these more nuanced conversations, as well as allow for some disagreement on this. So back to abortion. There's a lot of proposals for how we best move forward on that conversation. Is the best option to just give money and time to crisis pregnancy centers? Maybe. Is the best option to begin lobbying governmental leaders? Maybe. Is the best option to try to change laws about abortion throughout our country? Maybe. Do we just ignore the laws completely and reach out to individual women? Maybe. In all those situations and examples, the goal is the same. But the methods that we're using can and should change based on giftings, based on the situation presented us, and based on personalities. None of those things are bad or wrong in and of themselves. We should be against abortion. We should be for life. But the way we pursue that is going to manifest itself in some very different ways. Even related to the issue of voting. I've had some fun discussions and debates around whether or not Christians are obligated to vote. Now, personally, I think it's smart and wise to vote. It allows us an opportunity to voice our thoughts, but I can also see that there's times and places where there's a legitimate reason to abstain. We as Christians need to be careful where we are binding someone else's conscience. There are a lot of these things, again, that are very nuanced conversations, and there is room for disagreement together here in the church. As long as, again, I've talked about this before, the first, second, and third order issues of significance. First order issues we must agree on. So Jesus is God, the virgin birth, the empty tomb, those kinds of things are things that are non-negotiable. But there are a lot of other issues and implications that there needs to be room for charitable nuance and conversation in them. We also need to be aware that Jesus wasn't afraid of getting into political conversations. So we have an example in Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 and 22. Many of you probably know this story. It's the question of whether or not Jews should pay taxes to Caesar. So I'll just read it, and then I'll talk about a little bit about what it's saying. It says, "Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words," that's Jesus, "and they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, 'Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?' But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, 'Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax.' And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, 'Whose likeness and inscription is this?' They said, 'Caesar's.' Then he said to them, 'Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.' When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away." So their goal at the beginning was to basically trap Jesus. They're trying to make this a easy yes or no question without any room for nuance, which sounds really similar to most political conversations we have today, doesn't it? So there was a lot of debate within the Jewish culture at the time about whether or not Jews should pay taxes to Gentiles, whether that was in line with the Mosaic laws or not, because they were used for sinful purposes or sinful things. It was not giving to God his proper due. It was taking what should be God's and giving it to Gentile or sinful leaders. And Jesus basically sidesteps the entire question and says, who is it that's on the inscription? So pay your taxes appropriately to Caesar, yet at the same time acknowledging that even Caesar is in place because of God's ordaining everything that has taken place. And believe it or not, God even ordains governments too. So what that means as we read a text like that is we should strive to be the best citizens we can possibly be, as long as it doesn't force us to sin against God. And then over all those things, we should be demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit in every conversation that we have. I love the way the EFCA Statement of Faith says this on the Christian Living section. It says we should always be bearing witness to the gospel in word and in deed. So that's my encouragement to us as a congregation. Let's have some charitable and honest conversations. I'll show you one book really quickly that I mentioned on Sunday, Instruments in the Redeemer's Hand by Paul David Tripp, People in Need of Change, Helping People in Need of Change. This is where I got the love, listen, learn, and do. And just I think that's a helpful framework for how we can have some of these disagreements in a charitable way. So that wraps up our Ephesians series our Psalms series for the summer. We're starting Ephesians next week. So we've got a bunch of journal Bibles. I would like to encourage you to grab one of those to take notes as we dig into this book this week. I'd also encourage you, I'll attach it to this email, but go watch the Bible Project summary on the book of Ephesians this week to just give you kind of an overview of Paul's message as we begin digging into the little nitty-gritty details in it. And don't forget to grab an invitation card and invite your friends, neighbors, co-workers, acquaintances to come hear what God is going to be teaching us from Ephesians this fall. As always, if you've got questions about stuff that I am sharing or talking about, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to help provide any clarity that I can. Looking forward to hearing how God spoke to you through our Psalms series this summer, and I'm looking forward to seeing how God continues speaking to us through His Word and as we study the book of Ephesians this fall.